This is Undaunted.Life, a man's podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Let's get into it. All right, guys, today we've got a special guest on the podcast. His name is Max McLean. So he is an award-winning actor, and he's also the artistic director of New York City-based Fellowship for Performing Arts, and he played C.S. Lewis in the film The Most Reluctant Convert, The Untold Story of C.S. Lewis. So, guys, if you're listening to these podcasts, you know, one right after the other is Norman Stone, who directed and wrote this movie, and then Max McLean, who starred in this movie. So it was a very, very fun conversation with both of these guys, and I asked them a lot of the same questions because I wanted you to kind of see this from the artistic side as the director, and then the artistic side as the actor. But with this interview with Max, we talked a lot about specifically, you know, how he got into acting, you know, what kind of led him to that type of life, you know, some of the misconceptions about what it means to be an actor, you know, whenever you kind of get into it and you think that, oh, people are just going to be overwhelmed with your looks and your talent, but that you actually have to have the chops, you have to practice, you kind of have to get yourself out there. But then beyond that, we're going to talk about The Most Reluctant Convert, and we're going to spend a lot of time talking about the story of C.S. Lewis, because he is a guy that, you know, history should have forgotten, because he was a smart guy that went to Oxford, and, you know, that's, you know, reflective of thousands of people before. But why are we still today talking about this guy, and why has he sold 250 million books? And each year that goes by, he sells even more books. Like this is a guy that last wrote stuff back in like the 1950s and 60s, and we are still just like basically sitting and hanging on his every word. So we spend a lot of time talking about that. We talk about how Max's conversion to Christianity as an adult kind of, you know, attracted him to the story of C.S. Lewis, because it was a similar thing for C.S. Lewis. It wasn't this, you know, big dramatic conversion experience falling down on his face and crying. It was more of an intellectual pursuit. And we see that with his time with J.R.R. Tolkien from their time at Oxford, which is depicted in the film. And guys, the film really is fantastic. The Most Reluctant Convert, it'll be in the show notes. You can check it out for yourself. Family friendly. You can watch it with the entire family, even if you're not terribly familiar with C.S. Lewis. But then I also asked him the same thing I asked Norman, which is, hey, if you had to delete all of C.S. Lewis's catalog, but leave one book for all of humanity for the rest of time, which one would it be and why? He actually gave me two, but his first one was very, very interesting. So you need to get in there, because I have a unique story with that particular book as well. But then we talk about kind of what is coming in the future and what's coming after this film. Is there going to be more stuff that comes from him working as C.S. Lewis? So I think you guys will be excited to hear all of that. All right, guys, before we go any further, I've got a little bro tip for you. So I know some of you guys stress out about, you know, what to pair with which particular dish. And, you know, if you're cooking something, like what sides do you make with your main thing? Because here's the thing. I'm going to tell you the best side dish for meat. So if you're making a really big, delicious steak, the best side dish you could possibly make is even more meat, and specifically bratwurst. That is like my favorite thing to make as a side dish for steaks. But the best bratwurst I've ever had in my entire life is the bacon cheeseburger bratwurst from my friends over at KC Cattle Company. And guys, I just told you this a lot before. We've talked about them a lot on this podcast. They are a meat delivery subscription service, but they are the only ones that are U.S. military veteran owned, U.S. military veteran operated, and all of their beef, chicken, and pork products are produced here in the United States. Guys, they specialize in Wagyu beef, but again, it's the bratwurst. Like I love the beef. I love the steaks. I love everything that they do, but there's something different about their bacon cheeseburger bratwurst. And guys, they sell everything all on their website. They sell the Wagyu steaks, the Wagyu roast, the pasture-raised chicken, pasture-raised Berkshire pork, Wagyu bacon cheeseburger bratwurst, which I've talked about. And again, I've talked about this all the time. They're world famous Wagyu gourmet hot dogs. Food and Wine magazine named them the best hot dogs in the world. I can co-sign that. And they even called it a tube steak because it literally tastes like a steak on a bun. Guys, you've got to go and try their products if you haven't done so already. What's wrong with you? I'm making this work for you guys. I'm making it happen. So go to kccattlecompany.com. That's kccattlecompany.com. Use the promo code Kyle to get 15% off of your order. Again, that promo code is just my first name, Kyle. That's Kyle for 15% off of your order at kccattlecompany.com. All right. But I'm not going to keep them from you any longer. So without further ado, let's get into it. Max McLean, welcome to Undaunted.Life, a man's podcast.
Well, thank you, Kyle. Good to be with you.
I'm so excited to have you on. I will say though, and we'll get to this in a second, I'm a little weird to hear your American accent because for
Yeah.
about an hour and a half of my life, you sounded vastly different, but we'll get there. So part of
Uh-huh.
the reason why I guess you're so good at going back and forth is that you yourself are an actor. And most
That's right.
people might know a professional actor here or there, but that's not a common thing that I guess most people are used to. So I guess for you specifically, Max, just to start broadly, what kind of got you into, or I guess what got you interested in the world of acting? And then how did you kind of get into being able to do that on stage, in film, and on television professionally?
Yes, yes. Well, I got into acting in college because I had a fear of being in front of people. So I went to the weird part of campus and took an oral interpretation class, and the bug bit. And I spent my senior year in the drama department learning how to use my voice, how to interpret scripts, how to use my body, because an actor is essentially his voice and his body and his mind is like his musical instrument that he plays. Then I left the States and did my graduate studies in London, and so I and did a lot of Shakespeare. So I really understood the British language and the use of language there. Came back to the States and started to develop my own productions. Uh, Started my own theatrical production company, Fellowship for Performing Arts, that's now based here in New York. Uh, we do theater. In fact, before the pandemic, we had 3 shows on the road. One was here in New York. We really focus. Our mission is to produce theater from a Christian worldview meant to engage a diverse audience, diverse meaning intellectually diverse,
Mm.
which I think is the only kind of diversity that's not allowed. Um,
True.
so that's my background and how I got into theater.
So specifically, the thing I find interesting is about the company that you developed is there are
Hmm.
people that get into acting. So we're talking about people that went far beyond just, doing drama in high school or in college or
Yeah.
something like that. You actually went into it, but then you actually started a business. You didn't just leave the business to be you yourself, Max McLean, the actor. So talk about that transition a little bit because that's not a transition that everybody makes in that
Yeah.
industry.
Yeah, that's good. Actually, I think any artist, and I think a lot of your audience would appreciate this. Any artist has to have two skill sets. Really, he has to be really good at his art, and he has to be really good at promoting it and selling it, and
Mhm.
and giving having an opportunity to get it out there. I've been aware of a lot of talented people that just didn't have the discipline that it took to do all the auditions and make all the rounds that you have to do it. In my case, though, because I'm an adult convert to Christianity, and as such, I wanted to find a way to integrate my faith with my work. So the reason I developed the company was I wanted to. I knew people weren't going to produce the work for me, so I had to produce it.
Mm.
And the one thing, and I tell young actors and directors and theater people, I tell them all the time that the theater and the film business doesn't really need more actors. We got millions of those. Got a lot of directors.
Mhm.
We need more playwrights and we need producers, because those are the people that make things happen. If you don't have the script, you don't have the foundation. And then, of course, the producer, just like the producer in any business, he's got to get all the pieces together to get it done.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing that as you were talking about that, I remember hearing Jack Carr, so number one New York Times bestselling author, several times over. He's talked so much about the fact that it's not just about writing the best novels possible. It's about everything else. It's about making sure you're doing social media and making sure you're sending out emails to your mailing list and all those different things. And I think some people think that the world's just going to be overwhelmed with their talent and everyone else is just going to take care of the other things. Podcasting the same. You think, well, I can just buy a laptop and a microphone, plug it in and have a podcast. It's like, well, yeah, but if you want more than dozens of listeners, it's probably going to take a little bit of grinding. So you mentioned there, Max, that you became a convert to Christianity as an adult. So
Mhm.
talk to me a little bit about that because, like, I grew up in Oklahoma. That's the belt buckle of the Bible Belt. So you're a Christian just because you were born on the red clay. That's kind of how it is. And then you kind of decide for yourself at some point. It's a very cultural Christianity. So did you grow up in kind of a Christian household, or was there any kind of Judeo-Christian ethic? And I guess kind of give me the Spark Notes version of
Yeah.
how you accepted it as
Well,
an adult.
I was. We grew up in a nominally Catholic home, It was important to my mom and dad that we go through the first communion and go through the confirmation process. And I do remember as a young child kind of being engaged in that. I mean, it was information and opening up to a world that is not your day to day life. In fact, I do remember as a very young child. In fact, I had this memory hit me recently. Uh, I think when I was 7, my neighbor invited me to vacation Bible school. You know
Mm.
all about those, right? And
Yeah, of course.
you're supposed to invite people, right?
Sure.
I went, and it was at a Baptist church, and being Catholic Baptist is weird,
Hmm.
but I really felt the love of the people, and there was I went every day tremendously expectant, uh, and I also found that this is very strange that I wasn't particularly good at drawing in those days,
Mm.
uh, but I found there I drew really well. you know,
Right.
when or at least they told me I did. But no, I got a sense. I says, wow, all of a sudden, there's a discipline, there's a clarity that is infecting. So all these things, sort of came together in my 20s because I wasn't thinking about it. I was trying to make my own way. Uh, uh, I wanted reality to revolve around me. I didn't
Hmm.
want me to revolve. I didn't want to humble myself uh, to uh, to the world. To the universe. I wanted the universe to humble itself to me. And of course, I think the universe wins every time,
Yeah. Right.
right? Uh, so when I was confronted with the claims of Christ in my 20s, I remember somebody said that. Found out I was a history major, even though my minor was in theater. Uh, uh, this person, I'm still in touch with him. He said to me, Jesus was a person in history, just like Lincoln, just like George Washington. And that was news to me because I thought Jesus was fairy tales.
Mm.
And what was interesting, that clicked that Jesus was a real person in history. So that made me go and I read John's Gospel in one sitting, and it came right out of the pages. And then reading Lewis shortly thereafter kind of confirmed it because he said something, and I used it in the film. He says, "If Jesus' statements are false, Christianity is of no importance. If true, it is of infinite importance. The one thing
Mhm.
it cannot be is moderately important." Uh, and so I took the leap of faith, and what I found was a leap of faith is not a leap into the dark. That's what pagans want to tell you. It is a leap into the light. And if it wasn't a leap into the light, people would come back. They would say, this doesn't work. It's not there. I found that as I walked in faith and grew in grace, that things opened up, that my mind opened up, the possibilities opened up, the world opened up. It was a leap into a whole new glorious world. And so I've been walking it ever since.
Well, Max, I find that to be very important because there are some prominent people, Joe Rogan's one that comes to mind, that questions whether or not Jesus was a real person, right?
Yeah.
And there's no, and as a history major, you know this, but it's like there's no more testifiable fact in all of antiquity than the fact that there was a man named Jesus from the area of Nazareth,
Uh,
right? Born in Bethlehem, that was killed on a Roman cross at the behest of the Jews, right? Like
yeah,
there's no
and
more.
and suffered under Pontius Pilate, and
Right.
he was the Roman governor at that time. So there's all that's there, and I think most people, and I think even Joe Rogan himself would if really push comes to shove, he would acknowledge the reality of the historical person of Jesus. Uh, the question everybody has, and it's the whole premise of our movie,
Mhm.
is when he calls you, he calls us to repent. And Lewis didn't want to repent. He
Right.
said, he took a sort of a spiritual inventory, an emotional inventory, and he said, what did I find? A zoo of lust, a bedlam of ambitions, a nursery of fears, a harem of fondled hatreds. He said, my name was Legion. And so I don't want to deal with that, and you're forced to confront all of that. And of course, Lewis gave in. Now, in Lewis's case, it's really kind of interesting the way the film works is because Lewis had a conversion to God, not the God. He probably had a conversion from atheism to the God of the philosophers, which is kind of a random, not random, but a sort of a first principles type of God. Kind of deistic, got the ball rolling and left for other universes. But his conversion, the one that's the most emotional in the film and the most emotional in our play, was his conversion to what he says theism, pure and simple. And the more I look at that, it was kind of like he believed in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The God of Moses. It was like he had the great I am. He was confronted by the great I am, and he gave in and admitted that God is God, knelt and prayed, perhaps that night the most dejected, reluctant convert in all England. That was his conversion experience, that he knew that he was beholden to God, but he couldn't find, he didn't quite get where Jesus fit in until a little bit later. And of course, our film covers that as well.
Well, you've teed up the film a whole lot, so let's go ahead and get into it. So the film is The Most Reluctant Convert, The Untold Story of C.S. Lewis. Guys, you can get there in the show notes. You definitely need to check this out. Family-friendly film. Even if you're not a C.S. Lewis fan or you're not really super familiar with his life, that's part of the point of the movie, is kind of getting you familiar with that. Now, one thing, because I've got several questions about the film, but one came up as you were talking there just now, Max, is the fact that you were a convert to Christianity as an adult, just like C.S. Lewis. Is that what's kind of ingratiated you and maybe attracted you to some of his work? Because this film is not the first thing that you've done in your career that's centered on the life and work of C.S. Lewis.
Yeah. There's this sort of, there's this kind of apologetics of admiration in the sense that when you admire something, you ascribe to it, you reach for it. You say, I want to be like that. And so that's kind of what Lewis has been for me. He's given me a picture of how to live my life, how to think through the challenges of life, and how to explain Christianity to others that are reluctant. They may have these preconceived notions of what Christianity is, that they don't want to be a part of, and so you have to separate sort of some of the cultural accoutrements of it from the reality of the resurrection and the reality of the person of Jesus. That he came from someplace else, entered into our created world. That's the story that we have to believe. Otherwise, we're just the alternative is this universe came upon something came out of nothing. The world looks like it has the appearance of that it's finely tuned, but it isn't. It's every effect has a cause except the universe. That's what we're supposed to believe,
Right.
And it doesn't make sense to us. And so what happens is when you express Christianity as a positive, and you also show what's the alternative. In Lewis's case, and it's in the film. His conversion, he was a vigorous debunker of Christianity because he was a vigorous debunker of Christianity primarily because of the problem of evil.
Right.
He lost his mother to cancer when he was 9. He had a terrible relationship with his father. He experienced firsthand the butchery of trench warfare in World War I, and he came to the conclusion that either there's no God behind the universe because it doesn't make any sense, or the God who's indifferent to good and evil because of his experience of evil, or worse, an evil God. And then his friends kind of talked to him about, well, what's your assumption there? His argument against God was that the universe was so cruel and unjust. But then his friends asked him, well, where do you get this notion of cruel and unjust?
Right.
You call a line crooked because you have some idea of a straight line. If you're calling something cruel and unjust, you must have some picture of something good and merciful and just and good. So, because if the universe has no meaning, which is what you're arguing, you would never know it has no meaning, because meaning wouldn't exist. And so this got Lewis into the realm of out of atheism into his theistic and final Christian perspective.
Well, and Max, that's why I think apologetics in general and the study of apologetics is important for Christians, because I know that there is some Christian pushback to the world of apologetics. I've heard Christians say before, purported Christians say, if something is so apparently obvious, we shouldn't have to make all these arguments as to why it's true. It should just be readily available. And I want to ask that person, I was like, in what other areas of life is that true?
Yeah,
Like,
there's no area of life you have to, and of course, Scripture tells us to be prepared to give a reason for the hope that's within you with gentleness and respect. I think, particularly nowadays, because Christianity is becoming debunked at a rapid pace, and
mm,
the universities, it's considered irrelevant. It might be privately engaging. You might, want to have a little quiet time. You might want to go to your little church on Sunday, but it has no relevance to getting ahead in modern life.
right.
And that's kind of what our young people are hearing, and that needs to be responded to.
Well, and I think that it's very important because at the very minimum, Max, it gives you the confidence to enter into those discussions. Because as I tell people all the time, because, here in a little while, I'm going to be doing a speech in front of my entire church talking about how to engage pro-abortion arguments. And it's like
Hmm.
part of my training is going to be calm yourself. The first one to raise
Hmm.
their voice loses. The first one to goes crazy and calls somebody a name loses. And it's like, again, we do need that gentleness to be able to pull people towards the truth, especially when you know that your worldview or your stance on a particular issue is the moral one, because that's what the thing that you were kind of talking about earlier. When someone's like, there's too much evil in the world. Well, in order to know what evil is, you have to know what good is. You need a moral law with which to differentiate between the two. And then you got to figure out, well, how the heck did we get that? Is it just because we used to be goo and then we were fish and then we were chimps and now we're us, and we just sometime in the 1700s somewhere in Europe we decided, okay, this is a way that monkeys should treat each other and this isn't a way that monkeys should treat each other? Like, again, people want to talk about making sense, right? That certainly doesn't make sense at all, but most people just buy it hook, line, and sinker. But now I'm getting off into a sermon. I need to kind of bring it back
Yeah,
together.
but that was good stuff. Thank you
Well,
for that.
well, Max, I appreciate that, but here's the thing that's interesting to me that doesn't quite make sense. And I asked Norman, the director and the writer of this film, I asked him the same question, so I'll be curious about your answer. Is after all these years, I don't know when C.S. Lewis last put pen to paper or something like that, but it's been decades and decades and decades. Why is C.S. Lewis still so interesting to people? Because
Hmm.
plenty of writers have popped up and gone away. Plenty of writers have written, tomes that, people love and appreciate and teach in school. But I have a book list on my website called The 100 Books Every Modern Christian Man Should Read. And I've got, a marriage category and a money category and a philosophy and a literature, but only one author of nonfiction has their own category, and that's C.S. Lewis. That's because I am incredibly reverent of the things that he wrote. I don't worship at the altar of C.S. Lewis by any stretch of the imagination, but the things that he wrote, I feel like are so profound and so sticky, but that's me. And like, I understand why I think it's cool, but why are so many Americans and so many people around the globe, millions and millions of people per year, still buying his books and still reading his words?
That's a good question. Just before Lewis died, his attorney, that managed his literary estate, asked him, "What are you going to do about your literary legacy?" And
Mm,
Lewis wrote back, said to him, "Oh man, 5 years after I'm dead, no one will read a word I write."
wow.
How wrong was he?
Wow.
And it just, I'm sure Norman might have told you this, but since he began writing in the 30s, he published some 30 odd books on various subjects with such erudition and such imagination that he sold almost 250 million books.
Yeah.
It's very likely that he sold more books this year than he did last year, and will sell more books next year than this year. That
Mm,
doesn't happen
no.
to dead writers. And why is that? Well, he was a scholar of the first rank. His field was medieval and Renaissance literature. And in that field, he read everything from the Greeks to the moderns. He had a steel trap mind that could recall everything he read. I mean, it was almost photographic. There's stories about his ability there, that once he read it, it was locked in.
Hmm.
It stuck. But beyond that, he had this magnificent ability to translate all that knowledge from his reading into magnificent prose and speech. And he did it all under the headship of Christ.
Yeah.
Then you add to this along the lines of what you're talking about, the apologetics, because I think he's actually the key to the modern apologetics movement that happened after the post-war, is because he was such a vigorous debunker of Christianity that when he converted, he never forgot what it felt like to not believe.
Right.
He says something very interesting, I've thought about it, haven't got my arm around it, my brain around it yet. But he says a believed idea feels different. He said feels different than an idea that's not believed. And he says, I believe there is but one God and that Jesus Christ is his only Son. I believe in prayer, the second coming, in judgment, in heaven and in hell. And he also says, you know, when you run into difficulty, he said he was thinking in terms of World War II and the bombing of Britain, but he says when bombs destroy our homes, talk of Armageddon no longer seems fanciful, as in this weak piping time of peace. And in a certain way, people can make arguments in these weak piping time of peace that they don't make when they're in the fire.
I think that's absolutely the case. And you see that all throughout his writing. And you see that whenever you talk to people that have a reverence for C.S. Lewis and his work. And again, yeah, there are people that want to quibble with some of his theological points and all that. But I think for me, he wasn't okay. He was just a regular guy, but he was exceptional as well. But he wasn't a professional Christian. He wasn't a pastor. He wasn't a theologian. He was just so deeply involved in the work of Christ here on this planet that it just came out in all the things that he did and all the things that he touched, which kind of gets me to this. Cause you talked about, wrote 30 plus books. He has all these other different writings, but I want to know from you, and then I'll tell you what Norman said after. I want to know that if you personally had to delete all of C.S. Lewis's catalog of writings, except for one book, so you could leave one C.S. Lewis book for humanity, which one would it be and why?
Wow. Well, I can't have two, huh?
You can't have two. It's got, you can tell me what the other one would be, but the rules of the game are one.
Yeah. I think it would be the Screw Tape Letters.
Okay.
I do. And I'll tell you why, because he really gave me a picture of spiritual warfare that I wouldn't have had otherwise. I don't know if you remember the very first letter of it. He, for those that don't know, Screw Tape is a senior devil in hell who's instructing a junior devil on the art of tempting an unsuspecting human on earth. Mm. And in the very first letter, Screw Tape is sort of bragging about his accomplishments, how good he is at his job, and he tells the story of one such accomplishment of a man in a British museum who is reading something of significance that Lewis is worried about. He says, not Lewis, Screw Tape is worried about. Mm. He says, I saw 20 years' work beginning to totter, just go out the window. But I struck instantly at the part of the man that I had best under my control and suggested, isn't it just about time for lunch?
Yeah. Subtle, but
yeah, subtle, and it gets him out of that moment, and that's how certain spiritual warfare works. And what he goes on in that letter is very profound. So I would say that one, and the second one only because of the breadth. It reveals the breadth of his knowledge, and it's these essay collections that he has. The one I really like is called God in the Dock. And just the breadth of subjects that he covers. And he does it with such erudition, such wisdom, such depth of insight, such imagination, and such brilliant writing that I go back to it again and again.
Okay, so I wasn't as familiar with that work, but with the Screw Tape Letters, there's an odd thing about that book for me personally, Max, and it's that that was one of the only books that I started reading. I think I started reading it in college and then I just stopped. And I'm a finisher. Like, even if I'm reading a book that is a heaping pile of garbage, stinky hot garbage, I will finish it because I have to finish it. I will finish my plate. I will finish the race like that. That's kind of my thing. But I just didn't finish it. And I don't know if it was because I was in a weird place in my life to where the real contents of the book wasn't going to soak in and be sticky with me. But I did pick it up years later and finish it. But I've always wondered, why was that the one book that just fell away from me? Because that is so completely outside of who I am as a person and as a finisher. So that's why that was interesting. Now, what Norman said was a grief observed. And so the interesting thing about that is, the Screwtape Letters is fiction. And then I'm more drawn to C.S. Lewis's nonfiction. But hearing somebody that had his experience to talk about grief, to talk about loss, to talk about death, what it reminded me of, and it really hit me during the interview with Norman, is that's what the Psalms are, Max. Like I'm listening to a pastor, Joby Martin out of Florida right now, go through the Psalms, and there's so much lament, there's so much pain, there's so much embarrassment and shame. And we have this culture now, Max, that doesn't want anyone to feel shame. And I'm like, no. Shame is a tremendous motivator. If you're ashamed that you cheated on your spouse, or that you used to be significantly overweight, or that you used to think something that was really, really stupid, I think shame is a great motivator and reminder for how we should model our lives moving forward. So I thought that was really important. So I guess, do you agree with that sentiment with a guy like Lewis, that he's able, even as a normal guy, to look at these incredibly big subjects, but without quoting David, without quoting any of the psalmists, makes it feel like a psalm? Or am I just drawing some lines that aren't necessarily
Well,
there?
I've been reading the Psalms recently too, and I think there's a tremendous, Lewis was really high on the book of Job. And
The
he
brutal book.
loved, because Job talked back to God,
Right.
but he had his comeuppance and he recognized how far that goes. And I think the grief observed the very first line of that book is so powerful. I never knew that grief felt so much like fear. Just that insight, because he's examining himself, and he never intended for that to be published. He was just journaling, really, his feelings at the death of his late in life wife. So, but see, you can make an argument for each one of his books. I will say something about Screwtape Letters that may impress you with regard to your own experience. Lewis said it was the book that he least enjoyed writing.
Right.
Yeah.
Didn't he say that at different points he felt like he had gone too far? Like
Well,
he had,
he felt like it was all dust and itch and scratch, and he had to remove joy out of his life to get into the mind of Screwtape. But the other side of it is that that helps a lot of people is the book in many ways is autobiographical in that he is the subject.
right.
The raw material for that book is his own experiences with temptation.
And I think part of the reason that I was attracted to it again, to come back to it, and this is odd, but I think it's part of my calling, is there's a certain level of darkness in that book. And I seem to remember people talking about how Lewis thought maybe at certain points that he was even becoming possessed because he was trying to literally shake hands with the devil to understand how his minions work.
Well, he stopped writing, and then that book, they had 8 publishings in its first year, and they wanted him to write more, and he said, "No, I'm not writing anymore. I'm done."
Well, it's such an unbelievable work. Just yesterday, and I won't talk exactly about it because, it's something that we're working on for later. But what we do at Undaunted.Life is we're here to equip men to push back darkness. So part of the thing about that is we need to inform them of how they can. So, hey, the worldview, like critical race theory, why is it evil? Where does it come from? Why should we fight against the ideals of Marx and postmodernism and all those things? And how do we do that in the school board? Those are all things that I want to be able to equip men to do. But sometimes what that causes me to do, Max, is what I had to do yesterday, which I viewed a documentary that dealt specifically with sexual violence, predation on minors and things like that. And it's stuff that I just, you can't just, have that and then just go on outside and go for a walk and just skip around and whistle, because it's like the level of depravity in our world is something that men are not doing themselves a service or the world a service by covering their eyes, covering their ears, and pretending like it's not there. And so seeing a guy that was as erudite as someone like a C.S. Lewis and as smart to go into those areas of darkness, it is at least a lamp to us as, followers of his work or just followers of Christ, to be able to be like, guys, it isn't just about, Jesus raining down blessings blessings on you. And the moment you become a Christian, all of a sudden you get a new car and a new house and, two different new jobs that all pay you more. Like, this is a struggle, and there is darkness here that needs to be fought back. And Jesus has equipped us with the power to do so.
Amen.
Well,
I mean, that's it. That's true.
Well, I keep leaning into sermons and I keep getting all excited, but I do want to kind of come back to this. But in all honesty, I think that you did an absolutely fantastic job. So much so that I didn't know you were American, like, because your accent. Well, let me actually ask that. It seems like a minor question compared to the other stuff that we've gone through. Like, your accent to me, to a non-trained ear, and I didn't go to Oxford. It sounds incredibly legit. It sounds like exactly what you would expect.
Well, if
from
you're
Pat
doing
Flake.
a film, you've got to be, you got to be convincing. And
Mm-hmm.
I did train. I had a pretty good British accent to begin with because I lived there, so I had the music of it already. But it's the little subtleties that get you tripped up, and people, just like if a Brit is trying to play an Oklahoma accent, he may get the broad generalities right, but he'll miss a little something here and there.
Yep.
And so I hired a vocal coach, and we went through the whole script each time. And my natural instinct was to articulate this one particular, I would say, experience. And I thought that was British. And she would say, no, it's experience.
Oh, okay.
And so I would have to do that.
Right.
I would say, what did I say? I'd say complex. And she
Right.
said, no, it's complex.
Okay. You were too fancy.
Yeah. So, it was too fancy that time. Yeah. And so and so she'd bring me back. But there's a lot of subtleties like that throughout the play that I really worked on.
Well, it's good to have a coach, because then also, if people say, oh, that's an American accent, I'm like, do you mean like Oklahoma or California or Idaho or Maine? Like, that's a lot of different accents.
Or New York.
Or New York. Like, what even over there? Like, if you're from Wales, you're not going to sound like somebody from Liverpool,
Scotland,
Scotland or London or Manchester. Like, it's all going to be a little bit different. And you have to watch a little bit more than just the English Premier League to get all those different accents. You know what I mean? So, and I know you got a lot of things going on, so I appreciate all the time. We'll make this the last question of the day. And that's just, what are you working on now? Like, what are some things that we can see from Max McLean here in the coming time? But also, one thing that Norman shared with us is that this first movie, The Most Reluctant Convert, is hopefully going to be part of a trilogy, and that's something that is going to be worked on and kind of moving forward. So I don't know how that's going to affect you necessarily. Are you going to be a part of these projects moving forward? Give us an idea.
Yeah, we've Norman and I, we've just signed a deal together to create 2 new films. The plan is to go into production next summer. Hopefully release the first of the 2 films in 2024 and the second 2025. And the idea is the first film covers his conversion. So it's like from 9 years old when he lost his mother to cancer, to taking Christmas communion in December 1931 when he was 32 years old. But like you and I, we had conversion experiences. We didn't become C.S. Lewis. So what made him so unique? What made him so different? And we're going to explore all of that in the next 2 films. Of course, he died on November 22nd, 1963, the same day John F. Kennedy was assassinated. They died about an hour apart. And what we want to do is sort of juxtapose what was happening in Oxford at the kilns, where he lived his last day, and maybe what's happening in Dallas. And then also sort of look at the legacy of Lewis. He died, and they both died the same day. And we're coming up to 60th anniversary of that. One could argue who would have the greater legacy, and I would say it would be C.S. Lewis.
I mean, to be honest, and I pay attention to politics, and I'm respectful of history, and obviously I'm very partial to American presidents and their impact. I don't think it's even close. I mean, it's kind of like, to be honest, and I know this is going to make a lot of people mad, and this has nothing to do with what we talked about, but some people that died, quote unquote, too soon elevates them in people's brains beyond their actual talent level. So a guy like Kurt Cobain and Nirvana, that's an okay band, but people talk about them as if they're like top 10 band all time. And it's like, if Kurt Cobain didn't decide to eat a bullet, are we having this conversation? And I think you can have that debate. So I don't personally think it's really debatable between a guy like JFK and his legacy. Perhaps if he had lived longer, if he had lived till C.S. Lewis's age, you could, then the comparison might be different. But again, 250 million books, you said it yourself, and next year will be more, and the year after even more beyond that. And all of JFK's accomplishments had to do with politics, law, and his sexual peccadillies, whereas like what C.S. Lewis was dealing with is he was dealing with eternity and with people's souls. And so I don't know that it's even comparable. So I'm so excited that you're going to be on board for the next two projects. And the next one, especially around the time when the BBC kind of brought him on the radio to talk about God and to talk about Jesus and heaven and all that. I mean, that led to Mere Christianity. So I'm super excited about that.
And they gave him a national platform because people needed hope. And he probably had, after Churchill, perhaps the most recognized voice in all England.
Absolutely incredible. And I'm so glad that you're a part of this project. You're a fantastic actor. I'm really glad that you're lending your talent to this story. But for now, that's all for me. Is there anything else you want to get off your chest?
No, it's terrific. Look forward to doing this again. Thank you.
Well, you keep making movies and we'll keep having you on. All right. Max McLean, thank you for coming on Undaunted.Life, a Man's podcast.
Thank you.
There you go, guys. I hope you enjoyed my time with Max McLean. But before we let you go, we are going to do a quick resilience boost. At Undaunted.Life, our mission is equipping men to push back darkness with content that forges spiritual, mental, and physical resilience. So the only link I've got for you today is a link to the film, The Most Reluctant Convert, The Untold Story of C.S. You can go to the website. Make sure you check it out. Guys, get some popcorn, set everyone down on the couch, have a good time. It is a fantastic, fantastic film. All right, guys, thanks so much for listening to the show. We do appreciate it. Wherever you're listening to this, please subscribe, rate, and leave us a positive 5-star review. If you want me to come speak live at your event or on your podcast, just shoot me an email to info@Undaunted.Life. That's info@Undaunted.Life. Follow us on Instagram and like us on Facebook, and check out our website for everything else, including how to donate to keep more content like this coming your way. Just go to www.Undaunted.Life. And as always, we want to thank the band August Burns Red for allowing us to use their music for our content. The music on this podcast is their song Cutting the Ties, which is off their 10th anniversary re-recording of their album Leveler. The links are in the description. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Remember, keep pushing back darkness. Keep forging spiritual, mental, and physical resilience. Keep seeking the Lion of Judah.